Hi, so welcome to another version of Learning for Truth and Love. And today we're going to talk about building communities and professional networks. And Dr. Likely, welcome again to Learning for Truth and Love. And
Yeah.
Dr. Likely is definitely becoming a welcoming fixture on Learning for Truth and Love. So I'm really excited about that. So,
Excited
so
to be
let's start
here.
off. What's that?
I said excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, awesome. So, why building communities and professional networks? I think we should go maybe start by just talking a little bit about briefly about ourselves and, why this is important to us as well.
Mhm.
And do you want us to start us off?
Sure.
Or should I?
I learned, I think, the importance of building a community in undergrad. I stayed home in Pensacola to start my bachelor's degree at a junior college, and then I moved to Jacksonville, which is about 5.5 hours. Excuse me. 5.5 hours east in Florida. None of my family had moved or lived in Jacksonville. I was the first to go. So it was very different leaving where you grew up, what you knew, all your friends and family to be in a new place. And I realized like I could be whoever I wanted to be. No one at University of North Florida knew me. And it was one of those things where I had to soul search. Like, who do I want to be in this group of juniors, seniors, in these groups of student organizations? How do I want to show up? What kind of friend am I? All of those things started to come to the top once you get out of, where you're from, all of where you grew up, all of your friends from, elementary or before. So it was one of those things where establishing friendships, establishing that community and nurturing it those practices started to become stronger, clearer, what to do, what not to do, how to be a good friend, how to show up for people. What does it look like to have conflict, to have tension, to work those things out, and doing those in an environment of undergrad institution. So that made it better. That laid the foundation for by the time now I'm in my late 30s. Ooh, elderly. In my late 30s now, it's what did I learn? How to begin friendships, how to just, do the small talk a little bit. Hi, I'm here looking for a friend. Who are you? And being okay with that, knowing that we're not in undergrad anymore. He does not want to make new friends, but how do you at least start a conversation? So undergrad taught me a lot. Like once I left home, I'm like, wait, I'm by myself. This is weird. But also how that has now turned into 10, 15 years worth of friendship just by being, kind of alone on a campus and okay with, let's see if I can make some friends. And now building from those practices way back first days of undergrad or as a junior, a transfer junior on a college campus of folks who had been together already 3 years, and some of them knew each other in high school. And here I come, just like, oh, hi, everybody, I'm here now. And do we want to be friends? And what can we come into together? How do we grow together? And so it has been life saving because once you learn to do it one time, once you move and you start over and you have a new transition, I did that twice. And so I left Jacksonville and moved for my doctorate, knowing I didn't know anybody in Philadelphia when I went. So it's this openness, this trying again, and then realizing like there are people who are also looking for good connection past the small talk, intimate connection to be good friends with each other. Just so happens we're all working on a PhD together, but it was more than just grad school work. It was we were becoming lifelong friends. So how do we establish that early on? Again, acknowledging the awkwardness of we're adults and we're making friends, like we're on playgrounds because our inner child just shows up, but we get to be with one another. We get to start to learn each other and choose each other again the next day. It's like we can keep trying at this. I like you, and have that basis of friendship supported so much
Mm-hmm.
of grad school, undergrad, and professionally starting a new job, being
Yeah.
okay and open to make new friends. Yeah, it
Wow.
flows. It all flows together. The basics from the sandbox.
Wow. So here, so it's interesting. I'm gonna tell you what community and professional networks mean to me, but I'm so curious though. Um, Before I mention that to you, based on what the way you see community and networks, who do you think this understanding will be helpful to?
um, Firstly, all the black girls in all the world.
Okay.
I'm all for all the black girls in all the world all the time. And it's in these spaces of especially higher ed. I think anybody that is navigating what that can look like, either as a student, a faculty member, trying to establish new collaborations. I
Mm-hmm.
think that recognizing like I have things to offer. I want to build here with you and being
Mm-hmm.
open, transparent, showing up. I think the hard part as an adult, we let the schedules do the thing and it's hard to
Right.
show up. So to be consistent and even let people know I can't show up today or I don't have the capacity this week. What can we do, asynchronously? How can we check in? How do I better support you right now if you are overwhelmed? So it's in these same ways that you would a friend, the way you want to
Mm-hmm.
show up for a friend, you also can show up for professional colleagues in the same way. So it's
Wow.
literally anybody navigating specifically higher ed because that's been my experience.
Right. Oh man, I am trying to figure out where to begin with what you just said.
It's a lot of
Because
learning. It's a lot of learning.
it's a lot. It's I almost think that when I listen to you, I'm thinking that you were so much more mature, when it comes to thinking of communities. I think for me, because I grew up in a community, my community was my family.
Mhm,
We had cousins over all the time. And so they were always that supportive. And it's like when you grow up in that environment, you just really you take it for granted
right.
because it's not only who you are, but it's such a security blanket that you're not even aware of. You kind of know the treasure you're in, but you're especially aware of it when you leave it, right? And you cherish it. I mean, talk about community building. A lot of it was built around my grandmother,
Mhm,
which is why in my books I talk a lot about, that, the grandparent. And it's been interesting talking to even other, peers in the field who, whenever they read my book, they're like, oh, yeah, we had this thing with my grandma, right? Everybody goes to grandma's house,
mhm,
right? Or whoever that figure is,
yeah.
right? Now that we're older and now that we're scattered, what we do is we have big vacations together, things like that. So that's our community, and it's been really interesting and really encouraging to see. I feel like with the community part, I learn a lot from other people. Um, seeing my cousins, even when we were all on vacation, we got the young folks together. And I shouldn't say
Mhm,
we, I should say they did, because they were so instrumental in getting the young folks together, and they had that conversation. I was like, wow, talking. It was the three or four, right, of the women in my family, and they were really letting them know we're here for you.
mhm,
um, I think that when you are, I suppose, in some ways, as naive as I've been,
mhm,
where you have had that supportive network, and then you're tossed in a place. Oftentimes, you sounds like you really wrestled with it. I can't say that's necessarily that I was aware enough to wrestle with it. I
mhm,
think in hindsight, I was probably maybe drowning and a little bit more traumatized, too traumatized to maybe think about what is a community, right? Because
mhm,
you're really thinking about yourself in terms of how am I surviving here, right?
right,
Especially if you're not swimming above water.
right.
I think that so I think in some ways that community thing has been almost felt like a lifelong search,
Yes,
right?
yes.
But along the way you've had good friends that have stayed and they've become your community. at least for me.
Absolutely. Talking about how we grew up. So I am the oldest daughter of a pastor. So
Ah,
at the time when my parents got to the church, my mom was pregnant with me. And there are
mhm.
people, and when I think community, my first one was the church. Like I was at
Yeah.
church with everybody on top of at grandma's house, at my granny's house. And it was me and my sister. We're
Mhm.
the oldest grandchildren on my mom's side, and it was me and her with the adults for a while until other cousins were born. So it was a lot like our community, our interactions were home, school, church, grandma.
Mhm. Wow.
In every spot, there were different ways to show up, like always
Mhm.
negotiating this identity. I know the words
Mhm.
now, but I didn't know that
Yeah.
that's what that looked like, as a middle schooler going
Mhm.
from, school to church. What were
Right.
the shifts and changes that happened? How did I change how I interacted with people or things I
Wow.
said? Um, Even greetings. Like at church, you greet people with brother this, sister that, and at
Mhm.
school is Mr. and Mrs. And
Mhm.
as a child, I was just like, "Oh, this is how it goes." And now, having learned things, having gained new information, it's like, "Oh no, these are shifts in your identity, and you're choosing
Mhm.
how to show up in different spaces." And
Wow.
having that experience as a child, and going to a city and a university where no one knew me, and I got to
Mhm.
choose how I showed up. So I get on campus at North Florida, and nobody knew that I grew up in church. Nobody knew I was
Mhm.
the oldest daughter. Nobody knew anything about me. So I'm like, wait a minute. I can float in the background. I can not participate. No one has expectations of me
Right.
until when I tried to float in the background and not really participate, I didn't like it.
Mhm.
And I'm like, wait a minute, I need to be grounded, rooted,
Mm.
connected way more because I don't float well. I like being in community. I like establishing networks and family even amongst folks that I don't necessarily, share blood or last name with.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
So yeah, I learned I learned because I'm the oldest daughter of a pastor.
So you grew up with community. You grew
Yeah.
up needing to, and also, I guess in some ways tactfully navigating identity
Mhm.
in some ways, right?
And not always
Um.
acknowledging that it was tactful at all.
Mm.
It's like I knew, like, at school, I went to a private Christian school,
Mhm.
and at school, we don't sing the hymns the same way we do at church.
Okay.
And I knew not to just break out either in a different space. Like I didn't go to church and sing the hymn like we did at
Mhm.
school. But it's like, how do you know that? Who taught
Yeah.
you that? Where'd you get that from? And then now lifting that skill and moving it into lab spaces, being a biology undergrad major, it's how do I act in a classroom? Do I do the
Mm.
same things in a classroom that I would do in a lab? Is my lab space the same way as it is with my friends? Like it's this again space of choosing how to show up. What's not even always what's acceptable, but sometimes what's most comfortable,
Mm.
based on what's accepted sometimes. But it's I don't always I don't laugh the loudest if I'm in a lab space versus
Mhm.
if I am in, I don't know, a restaurant space with some friends. Like I have a huge laugh. I love to laugh, but the lab doesn't always see that because that
Yeah.
might not be, you know, most appropriate for the space. But I learned that as a kid going between
Mm.
church and home and visiting folks and growing up in the realm of you will be in different places with different people. Some things, this is what you do, this is how we are. And by we are, my mom worked at HR. She was the human resources director.
Mhm.
So to answer the phone, I knew how to answer phones very
Mhm.
well as a kid,
Mhm.
not realizing that by the time I was an undergrad, I would have a work study position where I would be answering phones. And it's like, oh, I know how
Mhm.
to do this. I can bring this in. So it's how do you now tap into different experiences, transfer them over to support a new community to still be able to show up.
Wow. Wow. Oh my gosh. It's it's interesting. I'm just fascinated by how opposite, how opposite, in terms of where we came from,
Mhm.
and our thinking. I think I'm trying to figure out where do I start with this. I think for me, It's funny you talked about what's appropriate, and I always come to the question: who gets to define what's appropriate?
Yep.
It's not something I've had to think about,
Mhm.
right? And it's not something I suppose I've had the advantage,
Mhm.
right, of not having to think about that. In my little community circle, I was, and I didn't really realize people had seen me that way in terms of having this vision of what I would turn out to be. And my family, I growing up under the British system as well as growing up, went to Catholic school, Catholic church, and things like that. um we had a system where we were ranked, right, first, second, and things like that, and so there was an expectation of all these amazing things that I would do and be. And so it completely contrasted when I went to college, where then I had to ask myself, actually, I don't even think I have myself. I was just existing,
Yeah.
not really thinking, accomplishing. I went in there, did really well, especially my first year. And then, I think it's interesting because this brings up for me uh, what happens if you're figuring out your own individual identity, right? That's just why I write about this. I write a I have whole I give given whole talks and chapters
Mhm.
on identity related when we think about individual identity versus our institution identity,
Mhm.
right? Like, how do you? I don't even think I think I was still trying to figure out the individual part, much less to the institution identity part, right? For me was always um there are moments when they've been disrupted,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Growing up Catholic, and then we explored other things, being in these institutions. And so navigating between all of these different types of identity,
Mhm.
um, where I make sense of each, and in some ways breaking
Right.
breaking barriers and breaking what redefining them has always become more important to me. And it's just fascinating hearing you because it just brings so much to question when we think about communities, and how communities are formed, because I never really thought of, I didn't realize you were thinking in terms of well, I know we were going to talk about the college space, right? It is a community. Um, but who and how do you belong to these community is
Mhm.
what always comes up,
Yes.
in terms of, and I've seen them come up in different ways, depending on whether I'm not an HBCU or depending
Yeah.
on whether I'm at a historically white university.
Mhm. Um, you said something there that about breaking boundaries and how those shifts happen. I think that for me, I struggled a lot with how do I work so closely in a professional setting with people, but I have like deep respect for them, admiration for them. I'm learning about their families. It's like, wait, are we in relationship past this professional space? Is that appropriate? Is that okay?
Mm.
And now being a daughter of the School of Bell Hooks, it is. But being an undergrad and grad student in biology in research labs, it was, is it okay that I like you a lot as a person? One of my lab mates got married during my master's program, and we would be looking at wedding dresses in the lab as we were waiting on some of our experiments to be done. And it was one of those things where it's like, wait a minute, I think we're like friends, not just work
Mhm.
colleagues. She invited me to her wedding. I was the only Black person there. It was
Mhm.
hilarious because
Mhm.
walking in, they were like, are you at the bride or groom? Both of them. They're the only people here that I know. And it was one of those things where it's like, I got to be a part of such a big moment
Mhm.
because we had professional interactions together, and the boundary of I am a researcher, a scientist was blurred with I am a friend, you're a friend, we are
Mhm.
human, I'm happy for you. And it was in those moments I'm like, wait, do we get to, I guess, blend hearts too? Like, is this okay? Because
Mhm.
we can write together, present together, work together all day, but do we get to show up as full people humanizing the process of research, right? Do we get to be in community past I did work with lobsters, like past these lobsters. Do we like each other? Do we work together well? And the answer was yes. We still keep up with each other. She's, excuse me, she's doing great. And it's because we were open to pushing boundaries of professional relationships. We got this wonderful friendship where I got to pick out a wedding dress in the lab. And these are experiences like I never thought I would have had. Like, of course, you think you might get invited to a baby baptism or a wedding or somebody's, 30th birthday or 50th birthday. Just proximity,
Mhm.
but also to have this relationship past, let's look at our data together, but help me pick a dress. Help me. I'm nervous today. The wedding's coming up. What do we do? And to have those moments that were mingled with
Mhm.
lab work, it felt like those boundaries were definitely being expanded, being blurred, being pushed. Again, knowing now, having language now, it was this space of moving past like just science content, past science knowing to
Mhm.
we're human people having this interaction around science, but we get to, be here together.
Wow. Wow. It's oh my goodness. I was thinking so many things when you said that. I keep coming back to what you say in terms of um I'm thinking not only what are those boundaries, but I never really thought of it as related to identity, even though I study and I
Mhm,
research identity related things. It's just
mhm,
listening to you makes me see how connected it is,
mhm.
right? That oftentimes, I guess I want to say not everyone has had that luxury,
Yeah.
right? Of being included in that way or being seen as being part of that community, which
Mhm,
of course influences your interaction. I think for me, I mean it's been both. I think um, I grew up very formal,
mhm,
right? And so even when I've had that opportunity, I'm thinking even with my advisor, who was always very open, because of the way I grew up and because of, my own identity and institutionalization process. It was very hard for me to mesh the two,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
Like sometimes people would call on a first name basis and I couldn't get myself,
Yeah.
simple things like that. I couldn't get myself to do that.
Mhm,
Right. And sometimes I still can't. It depends on the phase I'm in. Sometimes I do, sometimes, and I think partly it's that respect as well, but I
right.
think it's partly me wrestling with, um, you know, who am I, to you and stuff like that. And even though I had that luxury as well, going to
Yeah.
her wedding and things like that, which was really nice. I think that the community aspect. Uh, the nice thing about the community aspect, even related to the network we've built, is that the community is that network no matter where you are, right?
Mhm,
And so you don't have to necessarily be together in one place, which
right.
is a nice part of
Right.
that. We get to be connected, and the beauty of phones and group texts and group chats is we still get to stay connected,
Mhm.
which is nice.
When you were saying about connectedness, and you're like, I haven't thought of it that way. I remember having that like realization of, oh wait, I do know about connection and community, but I hadn't thought of it that way until I read Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. And she's
Hmm.
talking about the way that fungi connect forests and ecosystems and roots. And
Hmm.
it was one of those things where that's what people do and what people are. And how can we, she was making the point of how do people better mimic nature in creating networks and having these reliabilities on each other for survival, not just for entertainment, communication, for ease, but like if a tree in a forest is dying, you get interactions and signals from other plants to support the tree, but those networks are made of non-trees. Like you get to
Hmm.
send messages and pass them through
Hmm.
other ways. And I think that recognizing how, again, nature can teach us so much. I think that's when
Hmm.
I was like, oh, wait, we, again, as a scientist, turning off the scientist brain and being a person, that was really hard until, someone put it into a scientist term. Like I'm a life scientist. Like you tell me about how living things communicate. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. So what can I now learn from the trees, from the roots, from
Wow.
the fungi, and bringing that into my relationships, whether they are professional, they're new, they have some years on them and well established.
Hmm.
What can I learn, and how do we keep things growing and just cultivate it? Like, how do we keep it alive? How do we do check-ins? I have one friend, she'll call and she'll say, wait, are we still together? Oh, do we still go together? It'll be, we haven't talked in a week or,
Hmm.
10 days or something, and we haven't talked or text. And it's like, are we okay? Just a check in, how we feeling? And
Hmm.
usually it's, I'm busy, you're busy, but at some point we feel the distance. We feel like I miss you. And it's like, wait, are we good? Let's just check in. So she loves
Wow.
to check in. And then I have other friends and my sister who would be like, I'd rather never. Or not this formal, not this
Yeah.
language of it, but we still check in different ways. So it's,
Mm.
you're learning, you're always learning. And I think that's what I love about community. It's dynamic. It is never boring because something's happening. The way life works, we all are impacted differently, and you can be having the best day ever while I'm having the worst, and we still get to show up with each other.
Mm. Wow. Wow. I can't get away from the science example because,
We're
I'm
scientists.
I'm thinking of what we teach, right? We talk about symbiosis, right?
Yeah.
We talk about symbiotic relationships, commensalism,
Mhm.
commensalism, where one person, when one where one person may neither benefit nor is harmed, right?
Right.
Symbiotic, they both benefit. And then you have the parasitic
Mhm.
relationship. It's interesting because depending on how we orient ourselves and whatever identity we it's almost like we are forming those type of
Yeah.
relationships that organisms do, right, where it can be symbiotic or mutually beneficial, or commensalistic, which I think for a lot of us, I think it's been commensalistic, which
Yeah.
is commensalism, which I think is why we wrestle with it,
Mhm.
where we get to coexist in a space, but we neither benefit nor is harmed by it. We're just there existing.
And somebody else tends to benefit.
Right.
Yeah.
Until someone decides to pluck it, right?
Right.
Until someone decides to pluck us
Mhm.
from this. And, I do, I want to go, it's interesting. There's a direction I'm thinking of going with this in terms of, especially when you mention that, because, there's been a lot of, we've been talking a lot, there have been a lot of networks and talking about how this relationship have impacted Black women, especially,
Mhm.
right? Where positions were created that were plucked,
Yeah.
and it seems like there was the expectation um, that this would be something more permanent, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Among people. And I'm curious about your thoughts, because I'd love to then now go to talk about that type of network and community and professional communities when we think about even the academic spaces or the professional spaces, and what that means, you know.
I think that one reminding that reminder of from emergent strategy, and now you even using the words that we teach with, just remembering that we get to choose. We get to choose how we want to be in relationship partnership with people sometimes. And by sometimes, if I get a job and I'm hired, there's already a dean, there's already a chair, there's already an assistant chair, there's already a science group of folks, and I'm coming into it. So I don't always get to choose who those people are, but I get to choose how I want to show up in the network. I get to choose if I want to have the parasitic relationship and be completely drained and give way too much. I get to choose if I want to be there without any harm or progress, right? I get to choose if I want it to be equal parts giving and receiving. And it isn't at all one way all the time. It also you get to, and this goes back to the self-care beyond bubble baths. When am I doing too much, and how do I reel it in? Or if this is the space, because I didn't get to choose these people, if it's just a tense space, how do I support myself in this tense space? Because this is a network that I'm required to be a part of. And I think that's what's different as we get older. Our networks that we choose as children sometimes include our favorite parks, our neighbors. If we go to church or have different athletic programs that we participate in, those are our networks and they're chosen by proximity. Whereas as adults, our networks can be chosen for us based on our jobs. And if we're in a grad program, you don't choose your cohort, they're already there. So it's how do you want to show up in them? And as you show up, what do you learn? How do you want to shift how you show up? Excuse me, I learned that I was doing and giving way more than I was receiving, and that was a choice. So now, how do I get, excuse me, into communities that better support you or me?
Okay. So it's funny. I'm glad you said that at the end because I was going to kind of talk about that word choosing and choice
Yeah.
because sometimes it doesn't always feel like a choice.
No.
I think I think I think we have that choice when we're able to set boundaries, right? Because I think in so many ways, the expectations are set for how people would like us to show up, right? And so, depending on our own level of awareness, depending on our own level of empowerment,
Yeah.
right?
Knowing you, if you don't know, you don't know how to change it. That you just
Right.
don't know. It's a bit of a space of what's unknown. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we have choices, and the question is, what are the choices, right?
Right.
Because sometimes the choices are we need to make the decision to, um, sometimes the decision might be to leave, right? Which means our choices between do we want to give up a paying job, right? Do we say I'm not going to get paid
Right.
to move on, right? And so, unfortunately, when I think about choices, I'm also thinking in terms of how beneficial, are those choices for us, and then how many choices. What are our options really, and our options, are they harmful to us in some ways, right?
Right.
I mean, in the end, do we have to make the choice between choosing not to, I don't want to use the word eat, we'll probably could find a job anywhere, but do we have to make a choice between um, the career
Mhm.
in order to set boundaries?
Right.
Okay,
Yep.
because I do have to say, I wrestle with a lot of the expectations, especially for Black women,
Mhm.
the expectations for how we show up oftentimes is not on our own terms.
Right.
I think that the importance of our community to us, I think, is often used as a source to manipulate, what people think we should be, right? Because you're supposed to be quote unquote caring and serving. Oftentimes, we know we're thrown into those roles, or even that expectation exists that when we make choices, it should be for the benefit just of the network, even if we don't benefit, um, or or we are harmed or sometimes not harmed in the process. Sometimes I feel like even in communities that are supposed to be there for us,
Right.
um, that we are, uh, you know, we are the, what's the word? I guess when you think of that, again, I'm thinking of your fungus examples, and I'm trying to figure out which part we would fall under, under the the rhizoids and the
Right. Where are we?
and the lichens,
Right. What part is what?
Are we
Also, we get to change it. Like it's not always. I'm always the communicator. Sometimes I'm the one sending the messages out. Like help me.
absolutely.
And that's what I mean by choose, because not we don't
Mm-hmm.
always get to choose. We
Mm-hmm.
really don't always get to choose, but there are
Mm-hmm.
what I've learned some things I don't have to do. And that
Okay.
like I don't have to overextend and overexert. If my syllabus says this one thing and I want to be more lenient, if the syllabus says after 2 days I'm not accepting a late assignment,
Mm-hmm.
and in reality I know I can give 5 days, I'm going to give those 5 days every time.
Mm-hmm.
Also, and if I give those 5 days, I'm not going to 8 days. I'm not going to 15. I'm not going to 20 because
Mm-hmm.
now I'm overexerting myself to catch up and find the student to submit this assignment when I've already extended. So that's what I mean by choice. Like
Mm-hmm.
you, that's a choice that I can make that directly impacts me and my
Mm-hmm.
well-being.
Yeah.
Because if I'm now overexerting myself to grade an assignment that was already late, that I've already given grace for, then this is where I can make the choice of, okay, I'm done. I'm here. This is it. After
Mm-hmm.
5 days, syllabus says 2. We've communicated about 5, and you still didn't meet me with the 5. My choice now is here's the boundary. And that's what you were saying, like being able to know those bounds, recognize those
Mm-hmm.
bounds, enforce them for your own benefit, because you will definitely get eaten alive in any other capacity if you don't find those boundaries. And they're still good amongst the network in the community
Mm-hmm.
because you still should protect and be have some good space for yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely. Wow. I guess this is a good time for me to say I'm about to start my own community,
Yeah.
which I'm really excited about.
Mhm.
And I was trying to figure out, what these launch dates would be, and my goal is to launch it sometime next week.
Mhm.
What did I schedule? Okay, I scheduled my launch day for the 27th. We'll see if that'll change. But I took me years. This has been years in the working,
Mhm.
years and years in the working, because I think it really, I had to think about a lot of things, like what kind of community do I want to create? Um, Virtual, in person, what's going on. I started, when I started with the curriculum research lab,
Mhm.
um, and there were several students involved in, the process and research. But as I became a part of several communities, I saw my positioning change, right? And I saw my positioning, um, let's just say at the end of the day, after being part of several communities and being positioned in so many different ways, I decided to launch it mainly where at a time when, I'm ready to give, right? And I think that's really important. Part of this, I think, getting yourself to that point.
Mhm.
But also given my own terms,
Right.
right? Given based on, my own strengths. No one defining it.
Mhm.
And no one deciding that I was going to be placed as a fixture,
Right.
right? Or as a supportive role,
Right.
because that comes
They
at
love to
quite a
give us
bit.
those.
Huh?
I said they love to give us those.
They love to give us a supportive role. And yeah, I'll be in a supportive role, but I will be leading what that supportive
With that
role
support,
looks
right?
like. And I think, and also coming with the importance of understanding that in that community network, get a great deal out of being with each other,
Mhm.
right? Not simply having someone lead, at the head,
Yeah. And I
but
think that's
creating.
true community. It's
Mm-hmm.
never just I'm the leadership because I'm the leadership. It's I can be leadership, but I also need you. If I have no one to lead or
Mm-hmm.
no group to, guide, what's the point of, being the best leader? What's the point of having the vision and no one can follow it? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that speaks to one, good leadership and the desire for good community. When you can build it, when you can lead and still be a part.
Right. And I think that's especially, in the time we're in, right?
Mhm.
There's nothing more revealing about the nature of a community as seeing it break down, right? Because when you see it break down, then you see what it was really built on in the first place.
Right.
Because, it's kind of like easy come, easy go. It's built up so quickly, uh,
It can
and so
fall
easy
apart
to
so
tour.
quickly as
Huh?
well.
Yeah, easy to
Yeah.
tear apart based on, especially dependent on what type of, framework, right? Again, I'm
Mhm.
thinking of the Three Little Pigs, of course, right?
Yes. Yes.
you know, building your foundation and how you build one. One goes up so quickly and it's so fancy and so attractive, and the other builds tirelessly, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because I think about when you're saying it's like a continued tireless thing, how my foundation started in childhood and I didn't even know that's what they were.
Mm.
But like I didn't understand or I think actively recognize like, okay, you are going into a new space. We do these three things and we don't
Hmm.
do these three things.
Yeah.
And that carried so well into
Hmm.
adulthood because I already knew how to adjust and shift for different spaces or again, choosing how I wanted to show up.
Mm.
There did come that time where I turned off the loud laugh in the lab because that's not where we laugh loudly. And then there came a point where it's like, wait a minute, I get to be my full self. I don't have
Hmm.
to be perforated in this space
Yeah.
because that's what's expected of me. And if you want to now be in good community, that comes with my loud laugh. So I
Absolutely.
get to choose.
You shouldn't
And you
have to
get to
think
choose
about
if you
that.
want to stick with this loud laugh or not. But also I'm not now choosing based on location and people if I'm going to bring the laugh with me because that's a part of me that I am not okay anymore with turning down,
Hmm.
turning down, turning off. And if that's what you want or require of me, this is not necessarily the community I need to spend my like good time in. I could participate, but then I'm gonna go because I'm gonna laugh at some point. So
Hmm.
it's how do I now still take what I learned, take those foundational pieces and grow on them, expand with them as I engage more of the world, different people, participate in different networks.
Wow. Yeah. I just don't. It's interesting hearing you say that. My take is, if you're in just as you mentioned, if you're in a community that doesn't appreciate your laughter, right,
Hmm.
which you do because you're happy, right, and it's who you are, then it's not a community that appreciates you. If you have to think about it,
Right.
it's a community that's there to micromanage,
Hmm.
right, micromanage how you are. um, and it's interesting that we actually have to think about it. I just never. Um, it's interesting. It's again, it's one of the reasons I keep coming back to focusing on what Black representation means,
Hmm.
to us. Both as Black people and both as people who are not Black. I think we all have to come to terms with the extent to which we want to micromanage ourselves, or we want to micromanage each other, or be
Hmm.
micromanaged. In terms of, what is the big picture here.
Right.
You just know that, that's not a space that loves you and embraces you. And so,
Hmm.
I think it's important when you think about community to um, to help those who micromanage, and understand that those who micromanage need the help, right? They are the ones who need the help. That they are the ones who lack the perspective to be accepting. I think one of the things we forget is when we think about our communities, right? As Black folks in whatever
Yeah.
area we're in, we also have to remember that the other people, while we're sharing the space with other people, these other people also have other communities,
Right.
right?
Right.
And um, they're not, if they don't show up healthy with us, doesn't necessarily mean they're showing up healthy with others,
Right.
right? Because you do bring yourself and whatever that is.
Hmm.
And so it just that it comes up differently, when you're interacting, with Black folks, because there are other things at play, right? Whether
Hmm.
it's the power play, um, the play that has, allowed folks to micromanage who we are. And I
Right.
do think that we need to be aware enough to understand, um, uh, to understand what's healthy. And when we're looking at something that's unhealthy,
Hmm.
I'll never forget, and I love this. One of my cousins. First of all, I grew up with a lot of cousins.
Okay.
I'm an only child of my mom, but I grew up with cousins. And one of my cousins is so outspoken,
Hmm.
but outspoken in a way that's very, and I remember that's very, so we sit down, we have all these conversations. And so, um, there was a colleague of hers. I don't remember what it was he did, and she looked at him. He's a white guy, and she looked
Mhm.
at him and said, "Oh," it's like, "Oh, we're throwing a conniption again, aren't we?"
Oh.
I mean, you have to say,
Yeah.
when you sound British, like, "Oh, you're throwing a conniption." It's like, the things she would say. It's
Yeah.
like, "Oh," and I guess the person was really surprised that she had called him out. And sometimes you have to, not we're not always able to recognize, what um that the inappropriate behavior is not necessarily just towards us, but it's a characteristic of who the person is.
Mhm.
Um, and so, and I say that to say, because you mentioned the laughter thing, and every time you said it, I was like, my inside turned a little bit to the idea that someone had to think about. I just never grew up having someone have to think about, their type of laughter and if it's appropriate and how it sounds.
Mhm.
Mostly because I grew up in a community where I don't have to. I've had the advantage of not having to think about and to think about the fact that someone else has to think about it. Kind of. It's
It's like,
just
wait, what?
seems like,
Yeah.
what is the focus here? What's really important? Are you a micromanager? Are you being
Mhm.
micromanaged? And what's unhealthy here? And it's one of the reasons I in your last chapter of my book ends with not only implications for the economic pipeline, but implications for mental health and really understanding um, how being mentally healthy comes into play here, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't always attribute these behaviors to, when, network, when our community gets disrupted and network,
Mhm.
to our mental health within the community.
Mhm.
I think of some neural nets. Think of,
Yeah.
this is what I'm thinking. I'm
Yeah.
thinking neurons right now, firing all over the place.
Mhm.
Some are healthy, some are not.
Mhm.
And
Right.
so
Yeah.
understanding where mental health comes in and why, um because I've had that lens,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think of it that way.
And then recognizing again some of the networks you get to choose and the ones that you don't, those tend to be, well, for me, my experience has been that the ones that I don't get to choose have the most strain on my mental health. So that means that the networks I do choose in the community that I want to engage in will be definitely a softer place to land than the high
Hmm.
strung, high stress, not always giving in a way that I can feel in a way that I want, where I can now move into a community that does, feel like pillows. Move
Hmm.
into a community where we can hug, we can have picnics, and I don't always get to do that with the professional communities because that's not where, I chose the people that are a part of that. So
Hmm.
it where do I now get to give back to myself? Where does that self care show up in a way where I'm not going to be stressed in my professional community and stressed in a personal one? Like
Hmm.
that's a choice. That's my choice that I'm making for me. I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm just not. So that means that it's romantic relationships, close friendships, me
Hmm.
and my sister's relationship. If I'm having stressful times in community I didn't choose, the one I did, it's going to be lovely. So that's the way that I want, like, the ones that I don't choose, I want them to be as good as possible. But the community that I do choose, it's gonna be the plushest garden. It's gonna be the best space, and I hope to also, make that for other people, be a
Yeah,
part of good space for them too.
that's true. I don't think any of them will come without work, though.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
Oh, for sure.
And I know that's not what you're saying,
Yeah.
but I just want to make sure everybody understands this doesn't necessarily,
Yeah.
in some ways, even like you mentioned earlier, they're both choices for us in some ways, right? But I understand what you mean when you say those we don't choose, because sometimes we are stuck in them because we need a job,
Mhm.
right? We need to get paid.
We're
Um,
in a family and we're related to them.
hmm.
I'm going to see you for this thing. How do I now have, again, good mental health, good mental strategies, as well
Hmm.
as community that I can call on and lean in on?
Absolutely. I also think that we need to remember to work on the close network we're in to make sure that in order for the further network, right, to be healthy.
Yeah.
Because in a close network we in, we often sometimes what I've observed allow a lot of the implications for, let's just say in our personal network, sometimes we allow the negative impacts of a patriarch society to abound,
Yeah.
right? And we don't set boundaries there, but we expect the broader society to set those boundaries. Or we don't make those choices where we're respected in our own personal network, but we were expecting that in the broader society. And I see it also in, our community networks, right? We're talking about our churches, we're talking about, our family
Mm-hmm.
networks where we don't choose to protect,
Yeah.
our children or protect our women,
Mm-hmm.
from poor choices.
Right.
And so I think that's really, really, a matter of fact, I think that's probably even more important,
Right.
because if our expectations are low within our personal communities,
Mm-hmm.
right, whether it's churches or whether it is, family network, and we're not protecting, our children and protecting our
Mm-hmm.
women, and protecting the poor and
Right.
protecting,
The
um,
elderly and the differently abled, all of our
right,
margins
those.
that we're not,
Mhm.
intentionally protecting there. Yeah.
Right, those who are mentally challenged as well.
Mhm.
Then, that is an indication of, the health of a broader network.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that that's where we need to start,
Mhm.
because that's what we have more control of,
Right. Right.
and that we can demonstrate and make the example of setting boundaries, um, in those areas.
Right. And I think that it's again knowing what your value system is, recognizing what's important to you. And I don't take it lightly that I am in my close community is a
Mm-hmm.
lot of educators. And I didn't
Mm-hmm.
realize it until I was making the shift from being in a testing lab and trying to decide if I wanted to go in the biochemistry route or more education.
Mm-hmm.
And when I realized what my values didn't lie necessarily at the lab bench. My values lied in community and talking and learning with children specifically. And then trying to make that decision, I just looked around and it's like all the people that I respect highly, I learn from, I want to know more about, I want to be like they are good role models, good examples
Mm-hmm.
of certain things. They're educators. They're the
Yeah.
ones that already have the literal salary
Mm-hmm.
of working with our children of in caretakers. It was in this space of like, wait a minute, the people that or the space I want to move into, I already have those people there. Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
have to go far. And it's this I had to really acknowledge where my values were. And my value was never in the lab per se. It was I wanted to be with people. And that's because the people that I was closest to were with people.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing the things that I wanted to do. And it's like, how do I still, better engage with learning with middle schoolers? And how do I, remain consistent and build relationship with students? What does that look like? And they already were there to show me that. So it was because that network was already established, I was able to better myself with the people around me. And had that network not been there, then I probably wouldn't have done the career shift I did. So it's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of things like that are intertwined, and I don't think I always recognize it. So thank you for this conversation. But it
Amazing,
was
right?
that smaller network impacting the bigger one. Like I appreciate the way you
Absolutely.
you put that.
Yeah, it's almost like a chicken and the egg thing, right?
Mhm.
Because our family network affects the health of our larger network. And that's the hardest network sometimes to, set boundaries with,
Yes,
right? So
yes.
the health of that is really indicative of a
Mhm.
health of, the larger society,
Yeah.
right? It's, I think, and a larger society is indicative of the health of our smaller family unit. It's like
Mhm.
chicken and the egg, which comes first, right? Which is
Yeah.
influencing which?
Yeah, I'm thinking of a conversation I had with my therapist. Oh, this is really vulnerable. Oh, goodness. A conversation I had with my therapist about boundaries and
Mm-hmm.
boundaries with particularly authority.
Mm-hmm.
And we did the whole unraveling thing. Where'd you get that from? What part of childhood was this. And the more we went back to it, I realized I never had, and by boundary, being able to say yes, being able to
Mm-hmm.
say no, and
Yeah.
support those. I didn't do that with my dad. So I
Mm-hmm.
didn't do that with other authority figures as I got older,
Mm-hmm.
as I moved into different networks and communities. And so I remember the first time I told my dad, like, no. I thought the world was going to explode, implode. It all was going to just fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, okay. I was like,
Yeah.
wait, I could have done this already. He was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what? And
Yeah.
so it was in that, like, oh wait, I still have a choice here. It's not automatic yes or whatever it's supposed to be. I don't have to go along with it. And once I
Wow.
started practicing more of, here's the boundary, my yes
Mm-hmm.
is my yes, my no is my no, like with my own dad, it was way easier to
Mm-hmm.
do it with a supervisor in a job
Yeah.
position that I am not at all related to, do not know. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so it was in those practices of establishing the boundaries and holding them in the family community, that family network. Then once you start practicing there, you can expand. Or the other
Mm-hmm.
way, what you learn out in other communities, professional networks, you can bring those things back and support family relationships. But I
Wow.
definitely agree that nuclear family dynamic impacts everything.
It
So
really does. And in the spirit of, being vulnerable as well.
much. Mhm.
Because you're not the only one putting yourself out there. I think I was able to set better boundaries with authority because I've had to set boundaries, learn to set boundaries with my mom and her, her condition and her challenges. And so I had those practice,
Yeah.
setting boundaries. I think for me the challenge was, and which is also why we decided we're gonna, make sure we saw a marriage counselor. And I would just joke and say, oh, she's our referee.
Yes.
I think it came down to, when we're talking about, race issues, I got to see how it was easier for me to intellectualize those.
Yeah.
But when it came down to the practicality, where we really needed to talk about and understand where our own background, our racial ethnic background, um, was needed to be we needed to talk about how that was impacting raising a child, raising a
Mhm.
mixed child. That became really interesting because in my thinking I was thinking, I almost felt, well, not almost, I felt hypocritical. Like, how could I
Mhm.
talk about this intellectually? And I wasn't even, practicing it in reality in my home. Who am I to give you advice? How can I give you advice if I couldn't really have these discussion or really understood what it meant for us, right? And so, yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Like choosing to again unravel and go, where did I get this from? How did I learn
Hmm.
this? And I think that that might be a characteristic of a lot of us researchers, scholars, to intellectualize. Like we can do a
Hmm.
lot of good work if we, put a theory, a framework behind it that makes a lot of sense for us. And now it's like, wait a minute, practicality. How do I now live in this? How do I embody this? What does this look like on the ground, right? Like, what does this look like
Absolutely.
in motion?
Hmm.
Um, which is
The
the fun part of
practice.
research, but not the so fun part of applying notes from therapy. I totally understand.
What does it mean in practice?
Yeah.
So, what do we want the audience to take away from, us talking about building communities
Yeah.
and professional networks? What is
I
that?
want I want the audience to take away that community is necessary. It is good. It is a part of life as the
Hmm.
cycle of life. We do not live in isolation. Again, as a good student of bell hooks, community is where love is, our healing is. It doesn't happen in isolation, and so not just as a student, because this is me intellectualizing, but I've applied some of these, most of what I've read from her, and it really does shift the ways that you grow as a person when you are rooted in community. That community can be a professional network, but a community that recognizes your humanity that doesn't want to just take from you, but wants to see you also succeed. And I think that the symbiotic relationship there, like the movement back and forth versus being in a group to be in a group or to not be beneficial or harmed. Like I don't want to be in the community where it's neither up nor down. I want it to be good. I want to be an active participant in the group when necessary, because sometimes, you got to step back and take care of yourself, whatever that looks like. But also, I want to be in community such that if I'm missing, people know it's felt. I want to give, and I hope others also want to be good representations in their community. I don't want to say like good landmarks or good participants. Just be good in your community. Be able to be missed if you're not there. I think that's a concern always of mine. It's like, what is my impact here? Why am I here? And I think that if we do our hard work and, apply those therapy notes, we can recognize that our community, that network, being able to pass the signals, give the signals, be responded to well, all of those things that we see out in nature really can happen for us in our interactions daily.
Wow. Wow. Absolutely. I think it's important for us to understand that our community starts at home, right? It starts with those really close to us, the small communities that we interact with. Affects and influences the broader community, right, within our society. And I think when we have so many resources, that come out of our society that we can use to help us navigate and to help us be healthy emotionally. I guess in some ways, communities start from within.
Yeah.
And what that
Definitely.
means, I certainly have wrestled with that quite a bit. There's a community out there that everyone fits into, and so we have to. Hopefully, it's a healthy community, I should say, right? Hopefully, we choose a healthy, positive, and community that's beneficial to everyone. So, thank you for joining another episode of Learning for Truth and Love. And if you like this episode, please like and please subscribe. And you will also find this will remain live here, but you also find the edited version on the podcast, Learning for Truth and Love. Thank you.